Costa is in the briefing room. Here with me in studio is Caitlin Collins. Zeleny, let me go to you first. A bit more from the press secretary on the latest major exit in the West Wing. But correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't she saying last week after that New Yorker interview came out, wasn't she saying essentially that it wasn't a big deal at all?
She was, Jake, and that shows you what's changed. And the one thing that has changed is the man who has the office in the corner of the West Wing, John Kelly, the new chief of staff. That is the thing that led to Anthony Scaramucci's dismissal from the White House. But, Jake, I think I was struck by that Sarah Huckabee Sanders did not close the door to him getting another job in the government. She said he does not have a role at this time. So he came to the White House from the Export-Import Bank, which is a small sort of subsidiary of the government that handles foreign loans and things. He could go back there. He could go elsewhere. So I thought she left that sort of hanging out there. But she also said that Sean Spicer will not be coming back. She said she has not heard any new information on that at this point. That had been sort of discussed by some corners here. And Sean Spicer, who of course resigned as press secretary, he was fueling that by not answering reporters' questions earlier today. She seemed to close the door on that. But Jake, what she did not do is say what specifically the president found inappropriate or why he had a change of heart from what we know. He gave his approval to those comments last week, and today, of course, he was out. But John Kelly, the new chief of staff, is the one intervening factor, Jake.
Jim Acosta, the Wall Street Journal reported that, in fact, President Trump was put off by the fact that Reince Priebus did not respond in kind after Anthony Scaramucci trashed him to the New Yorker. Now we're told that President Trump found the comments inappropriate. It does seem to be more driven by General Kelly, the chief of staff, I would think.
I think so, Jake. But again, this is a day of contradictions and chaos here at the White House. The White House press secretary, or the incoming White House press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, did not want to acknowledge that there is chaos in the staff here at the White House. That seems to be something akin to denying that the sky is blue. Obviously, the staff is in chaos here at the White House. She said, well, if you want to see chaos, you can come over and see how my kids play at the house. My suspicion, Jake, is that her children perhaps behave better than some of the officials do here inside this White House when they're engaging in this sort of factional bickering that we see all the time. I will tell you, I thought another thing that was interesting here, this was very much a briefing where I think the White House is making it clear they're showing Anthony Scaramucci the door. She was asked during this briefing whether Scaramucci will be working at the Export-Import Bank, and she said no, that is not the expectation here at the White House. And Jake, I can tell you, I talked to a friend of Anthony Scaramucci who said he had spoken with Scaramucci earlier this afternoon, who said that the Mooch had intended to show up for work at the Export-Import Bank promptly at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Evidently, that is no longer going to be necessary. And I think lastly, Jake, I think as one story ends, another story begins. I thought it was quite striking here that Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that the President of the United States was joking about police officers roughing up suspects at that event that he held last Friday. You'll recall the President talking about that during that speech going after undocumented gangs and so forth. The President made some remarks about roughing up police suspects during this press briefing here. Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that the President was just joking there, which of course begs the question, how is it at all appropriate for the President of the United States to be joking about police brutality? Jake.
And those remarks were condemned by many police organizations. Jim Acosta, thanks. Caitlin Collins is here in studio with me. Caitlin, tell me, what are your sources telling you about General Kelly, when he made this decision, why he made this decision?
So we didn't hear a lot of TikTok just there from Sarah Sanders. She refused to comment on conversations the president had with John Kelly and how this all came about. So what we know from all of this is just from our sources that are in the White House. And we're told that this is something that John Kelly had discussed over the weekend, getting rid of Anthony Scaramucci after that New Yorker interview last week. But he didn't make the final decision to ask him to step aside until right before he was sworn in this morning. And we saw Anthony Scaramucci was in the Oval Office for his swearing in, as was much of the White House staff. But I think it really shows how much weight John Kelly truly does have right now in this White House, because last week, after the feud between Anthony Scaramucci and Reince Priebus became really clear, Sarah Sanders defended it, saying that the president likes healthy competition among his staff. And then today she said that the president thought Anthony Scaramucci's comments were not appropriate. So those two don't really go together. It seems like John Kelly must have weighed in, and that's what led to all of this changing their mind. All
right. Thank you so much. I'm joined now by other members of our CNN political team, Gloria Borger, Mark Preston, and David Chalian, joining me from New York. Gloria, I want to start with you. What are your sources telling you about how this decision was made, presumably by John Kelly, the retired Marine general and new White House chief of staff?
Well, I was told by one source close to the White House that General Kelly made this decision 2 to 3 days ago. I was just told by another source that that Kelly decided it had to happen, and another source says that the president spoke with someone close to him about it, asking his opinion, and the president was advised that yes, Scaramucci had gotten too far out front. I think the general feeling was that the vulgarity was unacceptable. And also, there's one more part of this. As one source just said to me, he said, Anthony was grandstanding. And with the president, you end up in the cheap seats in center field when you do that. No star can shine brighter, to use another metaphor, than the president in this White House. And I think the president felt he was getting way too far out front.
Mark Preston, Anthony Scaramucci was brought in 2 Fridays ago with a lot of pomp and circumstance. Sean Spicer on his way out, Anthony Scaramucci on his way in, against the wishes, we should point out, of senior strategist Steve Bannon and then Chief of Staff Reince Priebus. And now, of course, 10 days later, Priebus is gone, but so is Scaramucci. What is your reaction?
Well, I mean, look, the bottom line is that Scaramucci got way out in front of his skis on this. When you are the communications director for the White House, Jake, as you know, you're supposed to be behind the scenes. You're not somebody who's supposed to go out and overshadow your principal, in this case, the president. And that's what we saw from Scaramucci. What's interesting, too, is that when the general was chosen to be the chief of staff, you have to wonder what conditions were put on his acceptance. And from Gloria's reporting, in fact, this was made 2 or 3 days ago, was that part of his conditions that he could fire anyone that he needed in order to create his own team in the West Wing? And I think what we're seeing right now is that that's the case. Now, a very good ally and close ally of the general explained this to me. He said, listen, he's a no BS kind of guy. He's a very serious kind of guy. He realized that Anthony Scaramucci was not the person that needed to be not only crafting the message, but should not be delivering the message.
And David Chalian, one of the things that's interesting, of course, is Sarah Huckabee Sanders just saying that everyone reports to General Kelly, including, and she was specifically asked about Steve Bannon and Jared Kushner. One of the problems that has existed at the White House, according to people who work there or have worked there, is that there were basically 3 chiefs of staff: Steve Bannon, right, Jared Kushner, and formerly Reince Priebus. And it was difficult to get any decision made because one person would sign off and the other 2 would be against it. And there was this fierce competition between these 3 centers of power. Now we're told that's gone. General Kelly is the person who reports to the president. Everyone else reports to General Kelly. I guess we'll see if that actually happens.
Right. I mean, I think this is, as we discussed on Friday, Jake, when this all happened, I think we are still in this waiting to see moment because it looks like right now that Donald Trump is giving General Kelly all the tools and latitude he needs to really get up and running in this role, to really try to instill some discipline. This is one way to do that. But think about the way, everything you understand about the way the Trump organization is run, everything we've seen about Donald Trump's behavior as president in these last 6 months, the idea that Ivanka Trump is not going to be able to talk to her father directly and walk into the Oval Office, and it just seems a little, it strains credulity, I think. So I think what we have to do is sort of wait and see, can Kelly put in this kind of structure, but still Donald Trump getting the streams of information that he relies on? I also thought it was worth noting in the briefing, Jake, that Jeff Sessions got a 100% confidence boost from Sarah Huckabee Sanders. The Attorney General who's been twisting in the wind, Sarah Huckabee Sanders said the president has 100% confidence in every one of his cabinet members. That's the first sort of attaboy Jeff Sessions has gotten in 2 weeks.
Gloria, let me play, if not devil's advocate, Scaramucci's advocate for 1 second. This is somebody who has wanted to work for the administration for a long time. He's been promised a number of jobs, turned down here and there. He's been at the Export-Import Bank. He's given up a lot of money, sold his business. Obviously, there are great personal sacrifices as well. He finally gets appointed communications director. He comes out. He says he wants to improve relationships with the press. He does take steps to improve relationships with the press, tangible steps, including returning the televised briefing, which we're now all taking for granted, but for more than a month, it was off the table. He professed his love and affection for the president many times, defended the president, was a fierce advocate, and yes, there was infighting, but really is somebody who goes to work for President Trump supposed to think that he doesn't like infighting, that he doesn't like competition? From Anthony Scaramucci's point of view, with the exception of the New Yorker interview, he did everything right. Tell me why I'm wrong. That was we're playing a little game here, a little exercise.
Well, I think in the end, all the things you point out are true. But in the end, Anthony Scaramucci destroyed himself. I mean, I think it was his hubris in coming in. And remember, Jake, it was just what, over a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, where we said, myself included, how smooth he was and how non-adversarial he was at that first briefing. And we all thought it was really impressive, actually. But then he got ahead of himself and talked about firing people. And let's even put the vulgarity aside, which is hard to do, but he got out ahead of whatever chief of staff was in there, boasting about his direct access to the president, talking openly about heads that would roll, and talking openly about which heads would roll, in particular, who happen to be two very important people at the White House. And it was unsustainable because it injected a degree of instability into the White House that clearly a new chief of staff coming in, particularly one with 4 stars on his shoulder, would probably not be able to live with. And I'm sure that Kelly had a conversation with the president about it and made that clear. So in a way, if Scaramucci had stopped, and this is hindsight, of course, but with that first briefing and where he claimed that, he and Priebus could work together, et cetera, that would have been fine. But then he got a little full of himself. And I think when he went overboard, he self-destructed.
Everyone, thank you so much. We obviously have lots more to discuss in this breaking news in the White House shakeup. We're getting new information about General Kelly's response to when James Comey was fired by President Trump. You might remember General Kelly, until this morning, was the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Stick around. We have much more. Welcome back to The Lead. Continuing with politics, we're getting new information about the new Chief of Staff, John Kelly, and his response after FBI Director James Comey had been fired. I want to bring in CNN Justice correspondent Pamela Brown. Pamela, John Kelly, former Department of Homeland Security Secretary, now White House Chief of Staff. This is fascinating. Tell us the story.
So my colleague Shimon Prokupecz and I have learned that incoming White House Chief of Staff John Kelly was so upset with the way President Donald Trump handled the firing of FBI Director James Comey this past May that he called Comey shortly after he was terminated to tell him how angry he was. This is according to 2 sources familiar with this conversation between Kelly and Comey. One of the sources said Kelly was simply disgusted by the way it all was handled. And at the time, Kelly, as you pointed out, was Secretary of Homeland Security, and he was so angry that he even told Comey he was contemplating resigning from his position as Homeland Security Secretary in a showing of solidarity. Comey responded by telling him not to resign during this phone conversation. Both the sources did caution, though, that it was unclear how serious Kelly really was about resigning, and of course that never happened. But the sources say that he was particularly upset by the way it all went down, by the fact that Comey learned he had been fired on the news rather than by by the president himself. And the call took place, we learned, while Comey was traveling back from Los Angeles to Washington on May 9th. Again, after learning about it on the news. For context, Jake, the sources said that Comey and Kelly are not particularly close friends, but that they had a professional relationship and a deep mutual respect for each other. Comey declined to comment to us about the story. The White House and DHS did not comment. Jake?
All right, Pamela Brown, thank you so much for that excellent reporting. I'm joined now by my political panel. Paris, let me start with you. This news that now Chief of Staff Kelly was so upset, disgusted was the word, with how Comey was treated by President Trump, that he reached out and offered his sympathy, and even, and we don't know how serious this was, said that maybe he would resign in protest. Do you think that if President Trump had known that, that might have been a strike against him?
No, I think what it shows is that the president has confidence in somebody who's a strong leader. I think he views the general as his peer, and I think he knows that the general is someone who is loyal, who knows battle, he knows battle tactics. He is someone who understands that you've got to come in and have order in the time of battle and order in that White House. And so I think he would appreciate the fact that this is a person who understands respect, and respect for authority and respect for leadership. And so I don't think there would have been any change in his opinion on having somebody of General Kelly's capacity coming in there to hit the 6-month reset button in that West Wing.
Robbie, what do you make of General Kelly doing this? This is a pretty bold step to fire, essentially, is what it was, whether he resigned or not, to fire somebody that just came on board 10 days ago to shake things up. And essentially, by the way, shook things up in a way that offered Kelly the job, the opportunity he has, and his first response is to fire Scaramucci.
Look, it was the right move, clearly. I mean, Scaramucci was not going to be a successful communications director, that's clear. What's going to be interesting to watch is Donald Trump, rather, Anthony Scaramucci was Donald Trump's id incarnate. You know what I mean? I mean, this was just pure, unfiltered Donald Trump. The hiring of Kelly and the firing of Scaramucci is now the ego putting that into check. But what we've seen on this president over and over again is he always goes back to that id. He always goes back to those animal instincts. I don't see how over more than 3 years we're not going to see another cycle of this. On the campaign, he went through, what, 3 campaign managers? And we were just here a week ago talking about Scaramucci, and we said the one thing you can't do with President Trump is upstage him. Scaramucci went there, and he was gone. I find this little anecdote about the FBI director very interesting, because these are the sorts of things Trump hears, and it may be, you know, one count against Kelly, and then he goes back to his old habits.
It was a story that broke on CNN just before the news about Scaramucci. Mary Catherine, just a few days ago, the White House was singing a completely different song about that New Yorker interview in which Scaramucci went on this profanity-laced tirade about Steve Bannon and Reince Priebus. Here's what Sarah Huckabee had to say. I think it was Thursday. Take a listen.
You know, I don't know if he has an opinion on what they should do between the two of them. I think the president, as always, enjoys healthy competition and conversation. He sees that as such.
So, you know, the nastiness, the nasty thoughts expressed in that story, just healthy competition. Here's Sarah Huckabee today.
The president certainly felt that Anthony's comments were inappropriate for a person in that position. And he didn't want to burden General Kelly also with that line of succession, as I think we've made clear a few times.
Now, in Sarah's defense, it's possible that President Trump changed his mind.
It happens.
He's known to do that, but that is a complete contradiction.
Yeah, I think that she's telegraphing there with the burdening General Kelly that, and it seems likely to me that Kelly is the one who had a problem with this way of doing business, and he may have a problem with that way of doing business in general, as we see with perhaps this discussion of Comey and the fact that he didn't like the way that went down. Look, he's a person of professionalism and skill and duty, and he's been in the Marine Corps for a long time, so he's going to do things a very different way from the Trump White House. I think normally the White House Chief of Staff runs the White House. To paraphrase the old joke, in the Trump White House, the White House runs you. And I think General John Kelly is much less likely to be run than perhaps Reince Priebus was. The question is whether Trump actually wants him to be in charge of the process.
Going back to a point that you made, you're very right. The president does have good instincts. The one thing about his instincts, he always puts in the right person at the right time. Corey was the right person at the right time to run the campaign up until a certain point. Then he brought in Manafort to get him through the convention. Then he brought in Kellyanne Conway to get him across the finish line to win. He needed somebody like Reince Priebus to come in, establishment person. He knew the Hill, he knew the donors, he knew the party base, but he wasn't unable to get him across the finish line with big legislative wins. So he brings in, trusting his instincts, John Kelly to come in and set the order. But I also think, I have no way of proving this, but I also think Scaramucci came in for the right time to set the tone. 3 people left, 3 big names left that White House. Leaks would not be tolerated. Scaramucci came in, 3 people left. General Kelly came in, and the reorder is going to happen.
And just so I'm clear, I don't think the president's instincts are good. I think they are mean-hearted. I think they are dangerous, and I think you're going to see them rear their ugly head again. So just to be clear, I never said the president had good instincts at all.
I don't want to put words.
And I think this last week is an example of how terrible his instincts are, and we will see it again.
Well, I think the American people disagree with that.
I think yes, maybe Scaramucci was clearing the ice. Like this, he was the Zamboni. He came in and took care of that, and then you put John Kelly in this place to have a different tone. If Scaramucci leaving is a sign of Kelly ascending, I think that is a fairly good sign. The question is, to me, whether Trump actually ultimately listens to somebody who he believes is an alpha, who he believes is on his level. Does he want to listen to someone like that? Never before has he really.
So until today, there were 3 chiefs of staff, essentially. There was the actual chief of staff, Reince Priebus, until he resigned Friday. And then there was Steve Bannon, who's a power center unto himself, and then Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, who are also a power center unto themselves, and different factions within those 3 tent poles. Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon were very much opposed to Scaramucci coming on board, and it's been reported that he was pushed by Jared Kushner. That Kushner and Ivanka Trump thought that this was a good idea to bring in Scaramucci. Scaramucci coming in got rid of Sean Spicer and got rid of Reince Priebus. Is it possible, not to be Machiavellian about this, but is it possible that that really was Scaramucci's role, to get those 2 out on behalf of the people who brought him in, Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump?
I think that's what the White House would like you to believe, because it sounds semi-sane and calculated. I think this is exactly what it looks like on the surface. I think the president made a knee-jerk decision to bring in Scaramucci based on his children's advice or whatever. We also saw him tweet from the airplane about the transgender policy, which clearly was just a knee-jerk situation as well. And then he had somebody who I think right now he respects very much, who came in and said, to do this job right, I need to let this person go. And at the same time, Scaramucci had been out there and probably had gotten a little bit ahead of himself. So I think it is very dangerous for us to assign any more strategy or calculation to this than there actually was.
Well, and I have a question, too, about how Kelly's style, who is not going to be Mr. Drama, he's not going to be out front. And the interesting thing about Trump is that he does want to see his people on TV, but he doesn't want to be overshadowed. And you have to walk this line. Scaramucci did not walk it successfully, but Kelly's not going to be out in front, and I wonder if that makes him lose some currency.
Another question I have has to do with Scaramucci, and I want to defend Scaramucci for a second, Paris, as I did earlier. This guy came in after being loyal to the president for a long time, going on shows and defending him. He was waiting for a job. He finally got one at the Export-Import Bank, not what he was, he was promised a whole bunch of others. Finally, he gets a job at the White House. At great personal sacrifice, at great financial sacrifice, he comes in, he does what he thinks he's supposed to be doing, which is defending the president, saying he's going to smooth over relationships with the press, which he does to an extent. And then, in addition, he throws some elbows. And guess what? This is already a place with a lot of elbows being thrown. Is it possible that he thought he was just doing what he needed to do and is completely stunned by this?
I think Scaramucci, I think one correction, he actually came in, he was head of OPL for briefly, public liaison, so he had one position. But I think he came in doing what he thought to be right, doing what he thought that the president wanted, but he might have taken it just a bit too far. Some of the colorful language, the president and said that Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump might have also found that a little bit inappropriate. So I think that he did not realize that you're now at the White House. It's a different bar. It's not New York. And while that might have worked in years past, it no longer works right now. And there's a repercussion for your actions. And the president allowed General Kelly to come in and have the latitude as the new chief of staff to set the standard that just won't be tolerated in this new White House.
But, Robbie, let me ask you, this is a president who has, on that Access Hollywood tape, said some pretty graphic things. And what Scaramucci said about Steve Bannon was a figure of speech. What President Trump said on that Access Hollywood tape was not a figure of speech. Neither of them can I quote right now. Do you think he was offended?
Look, I don't believe most of what these folks say anymore. I mean, and I mean that, like, honestly, that's not sort of partisan rhetoric. It's just at so many junctures throughout this entire episode of the campaign and now here, they don't tell the truth. So I think it's just an excuse for them to paper this over, but I don't believe that.
Great, Pat. I got to go. We got 6 seconds left, Paris. Thank you so much, Mary Catherine, Robbie. Appreciate it. Be sure to follow me on Facebook and Twitter at Jake Tapper. Tweet the show at The Lead CNN. Join us tonight for a special primetime edition of The Lead at 10 o'clock tonight. That's it. Handing it over to Wolf Blitzer. Thanks for watching.
On this first day on the job for the Chief of Staff, hours into General John Kelly's job, we have learned that the Chief of Communications, Anthony Scaramucci, who had been at his post for all of 11 days, offered his resignation. He is out. A couple of quotes before we talk to Jeff Zeleny. John Kelly is in charge now, one source close to Kelly tells CNN. And apparently, actually, Jeff Zeleny, let me bring you in and we can deliver this together. The news behind the timing, apparently, and you tell me, it was General Kelly who thought that Scaramucci wasn't quite disciplined enough, right? That he had burned his credibility in his post.
Sure, Brooke. I mean, that's what we are learning this afternoon. And it is also a sign that the president is giving his new chief of staff the full authority that he promised he would or said he would last Friday when he made this surprise announcement that Reince Priebus was leaving. But as it pertains to this, Brooke, we are being told that Anthony Scaramucci was essentially escorted off the White House property earlier this afternoon. It was after the chief of staff, John Kelly, said, look, he does not think that he is right for this White House. All goes back to the tone of that conversation, the interview with the New Yorker magazine, Brooke, that was so incendiary and really divisive. I'm also being told this afternoon that Jared Kushner, the son-in-law and senior advisor, as well as Ivanka Trump, the president's daughter, also supported this decision for Anthony Scaramucci to leave. But we should also point out they also supported the decision for him to come in. And in fact, Ivanka Trump was in the room when the president was interviewing him for the job just less than 2 weeks ago, Brooke. So this is all happening pretty abruptly. There was a big question in Washington, how long would Anthony Scaramucci stay on the job? Few people thought that he would be leaving this afternoon, Brooke. But also we're told the president was sounding people out, as he often does throughout the weekend. And he talked to one ally who said this, Brooke. He asked if Anthony Scaramucci had seriously and permanently damaged himself. This ally of the president says, yes, sir, I believe he has. The president agreed. That was yesterday. So, Brooke, that sort of sets the conversation, the table for what happened here today when the new chief of staff came in. Really one of his first official acts, Anthony Scaramucci out. Brooke.
Hang on a second, Jeff, just quickly. Did you say Scaramucci was escorted off the property?
We are told by our producers here, our team here, that he was escorted off the property, which isn't necessarily unusual. I mean, if someone is no longer working here, he has no reason to be here. So we are told that he was escorted off the property earlier this afternoon. Now the question is what happens next. Most people in Donald Trump's orbit, President Trump's orbit, never leave entirely. They go to a different part of the structure or the system. He obviously still supports this president very much. So we'll be keeping an eye on and trying to report more what he's going to do after this. I expect that he will stay in his orbit as an outside advisor of some kind, perhaps even some other type of job in the government. I wouldn't rule that out, Brooke. But in terms of the White House grounds, the West Wing here, he is no longer here.
All right, Jeff, thank you so much. Great reporting, as always, from the White House. Mark Preston is here. Gloria Borger is back. Thoughts, ruminations?
Well, a couple of things. One is his legacy will go down as...
Can you have a legacy after 11 days?
Oh, no, you absolutely can have a legacy after 11 days.
Short legacy.
Short legacy.
Okay.
One is he forced the chief of staff and the communications director to leave. In many ways. It was his actions that did so. The briefings apparently are now on the camera. We're going to see a briefing later on today that will be on camera. He said he wanted to open that up, so perhaps that's another legacy thing. And quite frankly, we're never going to forget about the telephone call that he had with our friend and colleague that put him in this situation, Ryan Lizza.
So there are a couple of things I'm hearing. One is that the president over the weekend was asking some of his closest allies about what they thought Scaramucci and his behavior, and should he get rid of him? And clearly the answer was yes. The other thing that I heard from a source close to the White House is that General Kelly I was told, made the decision 2 to 3 days ago. So if we're trying to piece this all together, perhaps Kelly made the decision that this needed to happen, went to the president maybe was sounding out his friends and allies. And then this source also said to me, the days of tolerating BS in this White House are over.
Right. Oof. You know, I think there's something to be said about pulling the Band-Aid off, right? So the Band-Aid has been pulled off. This has been a very difficult time in terms of personnel at the White House and having the right people in place. I mean, I hate to say this, but we could actually see more people go now. I mean, you have a new chief of staff who does want to bring order, to the White House and perhaps a more military type structure. We could actually see more people go.
You know, we were having this whole conversation when it was all breaking. You and Challie made the great point about the star getting a tad, burning a little too brightly when you're in a situation where there is really only one star, that being the President of the United States. We talked once upon a time about maybe Steve Bannon and the caricature of who he was and what he represented to the press and everyone else, a little too big for the President. And do you think that was the case with Scaramucci, with this piece in the New Yorker, the 30-minute conversation he had with Chris Cuomo on this network end of last week? Sorry. Do you think that was a piece of it?
Yes, I think so. I think there's no brighter star in the constellation than the President of the United States. And when you have somebody coming out, as you have a new chief of staff coming in saying, I'm going to fire everybody, or while your old chief of staff is sitting there, it's unsustainable. It's untenable. And remember, we did not hear Donald Trump didn't tweet about Scaramucci's vulgarity. You know, he didn't come out and say, by the way, I don't approve of this, because the message that Scaramucci was delivering, as vulgar as he delivered it, was that I want the Reince Priebus has got to go and Steve Bannon has got to go. And that was clearly sanctioned by the President of the United States. I think the way he did it got him in a lot of trouble. And I think that's a real issue.
It's just interesting to know what you're telling me from your sources, that the president had conversations over the weekend with people, maybe feeling them out as to what he should do with Scaramucci after this, profanity-laced piece in the New Yorker, which, any of us wouldn't be sitting here the next day had we used any of that language, and yet it took the president having conversations with other people to make a decision.
I think what he was, I don't know the exact content of the conversation, but I guess it was, is he redeemable or not?
Yeah.
Does he have to go, or is there any way to salvage this? Because, after all, Scaramucci clearly feels a bond with this president. And, he's had a very bad week. I mean, there have been reports in the newspapers that he's in the middle of a divorce. He's just had a new baby. Now he's lost his job. This is a lot of pile on. And it was, however, a problem of his own creation.
I do think that what might be lost in all of this is that these conversations do happen a lot where there is so much infighting, but they're often not reported, right? I mean, the fact that he didn't know as the communications director, he did not know the ground rules when he was talking to this reporter, where he just lit into everybody. That is a problem. Second thing is, when I talk to people on Capitol Hill, specifically Republican offices, there's a sense of decorum still in Washington. As partisan as it is, as much as Democrats hate Republicans, there's a sense of decorum. And I think that from Capitol Hill, there was a level of unease having Scaramucci be the person who was going to be crafting the message for the president.
Right. Let me bring in Brian Stelter, our senior media correspondent here on all of this. And so, Brian, we were talking, let's just jog back. I'm losing track of time frame. I don't know if it was weeks with Sean Spicer, announcing, knowing that Scaramucci was coming in, and, the president wanted to keep him, and he says, no, I'm going to leave by August. Is there any chance that Spicer might stick around with Scaramucci out?
I've asked him. He has not responded. He has declined to comment to other reporters asking that exact same question, Brooke. I think it's unlikely, but let's not rule anything out on this edition of White House Survivor. That's exactly what it feels like at this moment. I would suggest an alternative scenario to what Mark was just describing, that you see Scaramucci give this interview, shocking to everyone, including the president. It's possible the president wanted some of this to happen, wanted Scaramucci to go out there and shake it up and cause Priebus to be leaving. Who knows exactly? We'll see if the president tweets about this, but it's quite possible that Scaramucci was doing some things the president wanted, even when he called Ryan Lizza. But by not saying it was off the record, by giving those quotes, it does seem that it was the beginning of the end for Scaramucci. He was barely visible after that interview was published on Thursday. And just to reiterate one other point, on one level, this is a very sad human story, that he had a child born last week in New York with his wife. They're going through a divorce, according to the New York tabloids, which are, of course, feasting on this story. But people close to Scaramucci confirmed that he wasn't there for the birth of this child, that he wasn't able to meet the child for several days because of his brand new job at the White House that he had wanted for so long. It's a sad story on that personal, human level. And I wonder, what we don't know, Brooke, is what comes next for him, if he's going to have some other job in Washington or not.
Right. No, on the personal level, listen, we all wish him the very best. And you mentioned the Ryan Lizza interview. Guys, let me know, is Lizza on the phone? Ryan Lizza, are you with me?
I am. How you doing?
Hi, Ryan Lizza. Have you been keeping up with the news, say, in the last 30 minutes? Thoughts?
I have.
Thoughts?
You know, after that interview appeared, a lot of people asked me, do you think Anthony Scaramucci will be fired? And I would say, you know, he's either going to be fired or promoted. You never know with Donald Trump. And I think the early indications were that Trump was either neutral to positive about some of the things he said. And, of course, the biggest story in the wake of that interview was that Reince Priebus got fired, not Anthony Scaramucci. So that seemed to suggest where Trump, his opinion about the interview. But, you know, one thing I think here, and I don't know if we have this fully, we don't know this yet, but from the statement that the White House put out about saying that the new Chief of Staff, John Kelly, should have a clean slate, it does suggest that Kelly is doing what any sane chief of staff would do, coming into a White House that's factionalized. He's trying to exercise control, make sure everything's running through him. And Scaramucci, of course, was famously reporting to the president, not to the chief of staff. And so, you know, it's a sign that perhaps Kelly has a little bit more authority that Reince Priebus did, if indeed that Kelly, you know, asked or wanted this to happen.
Yeah, yes to the clean slate. Yeah, okay. Yes to the clean slate. That was part of the White House statement, and also apparently, you know, General Kelly, as chief of staff, on day one, apparently he wanted him Scaramucci removed because he didn't think Scaramucci was disciplined and has burned his credibility. And listen, I know you were on TV all over the place in the wake of this extraordinary interview, but just to remind people, I mean, Mark Preston made the point. How did he not know? Is that the comms director at the White House, just like ground rules on talking to a reporter on the phone and what would be included and not included. I mean, you've been doing this for years. It's not like you cajoled this out of him. He just kind of let it rip.
Yeah, look, what happened was I had tweeted earlier in the evening that Scaramucci was having dinner with Sean Hannity and some other folks. He got out of that dinner, and he was getting requests from other reporters about it, and was informed of the tweet and then called me. The conversation started with him trying to find out who revealed what to me was relatively trivial information, who the president was dining with. And then it sort of, I guess you could say, escalated, or it sort of just went off in those multiple directions. And I sort of turned it around and turned it into an interview with him. And, you know, he went off on Reince Priebus in pretty colorful language, went off on Steve Bannon, the chief strategist over there at the White House, talked about calling in the FBI to investigate leaks, you know, without actually offering any evidence that there was something that the FBI should be investigating. And so it was, I mean, I've said this before, it was probably the most unusual interview I've ever had with a government official in 20 years of covering Washington.
And might be forever and ever and ever from here on out. But what an extraordinary interview. And obviously it reached the president. Ryan, I'm going to let you catch your breath. Ryan Liza, thank you so much for getting to a phone and calling in. As, listen, you in this story was, it sounds like a central piece in some of these decisions. Let's go back to the White House. Jim Acosta, our senior White House correspondent, because what are sources telling you about how the president then perceived the interview between Liza and Scaramucci and maybe talking about his ultimate decision?
Right, but we know from talking to sources that the president initially was pretty pleased with what Anthony Scaramucci said. He liked this sort of take no prisoner style that he was exhibiting last week, but that eventually the president soured on Anthony Scaramucci, felt that he was becoming more of a story than he was, or becoming more of a story than this White House was. And I can tell you from talking to a friend of Anthony Scaramucci just in the last several minutes, this source was telling me that Scaramucci talked to retired General Kelly, the new White House Chief of Staff, yesterday and made this offer to him to step aside to give essentially the new Chief of Staff the ability to put together his own team and to have free reign. That's essentially what the White House is also saying about all of this right now, that Scaramucci decided to step aside to give General Kelly a clean slate. But this friend of Scaramucci also said that he plans to show up at his other job with the administration, and that is with the Export-Import Bank tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Obviously, you know, this is somebody who has been very close to the president over the last couple of years during the presidential campaign, during the transition, and then being here in office. And according to this friend of Anthony Scaramucci, the man known as the Mooch intends to be a utility player for this president and continue to be an outside advisor. And so they are trying very mightily over here at the White House to sort of put the best face on this. But Brooke, make no mistake, when the president is tweeting earlier this morning, no White House chaos, this has once again been a day of White House chaos and really the norm, not the exception over here. This is a White House that appears to be in staff chaos and staff turmoil from week to week. And that is why when you talk to people inside the administration, inside the White House, outside the White House, people who are close to the president, that is why they say to you that the first 6 months of this administration have felt like 6 years, because this is just something that constantly plays out. Keep in mind, Anthony Scaramucci just on the job for 11 days and has what is undoubtedly going to go down as one of the most controversial tenures that a White House communications director has ever had, and has done the exact opposite job of what a White House communications director does. This person wasn't shaping the messaging of this administration. This person, Anthony Scaramucci, was damaging the messaging of this administration. Brooke.
You were there in the briefing room. This is a must-see briefing. We are going to take it as soon as it begins there with Sarah Huckabee Sanders on quite a day at the White House. Jim, we'll stand by for that. Thank you so much. As we got an eye on that podium, Lynette Lopez has just been seated from Business Insider.
We're trying to report.
The wall is gone. To you, what do you make of just all of this?
Scaramucci helped prompt Sean Spicer's exit. He helped contribute to Reince Priebus's exit. At least if you look at the chronology of the past 10 or 11 days, he went from being the most visible man at the White House last Sunday, 8 days ago, to being invisible this Sunday. Right after the Ryan Liz interview, no more interviews, no more press. All of a sudden, Scaramucci disappeared. So maybe that was a signal of what was to come today with Kelly taking charge. What this doesn't do is tell us anything about the press strategy at the White House. There's no clarity about what the press strategy is, if there is a press stragy at all.
He was saying maybe bring the cameras back. That's what we got from Scaramucci.
That's right. He was suggesting sort of a carrot and a stick, offering a carrot by allowing the cameras to be turned back on. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, all of a sudden, is the leading force now in the press shop. As the new press secretary, who will have to step in front of the cameras in 45 minutes, she is now the only person there that we've had there all along, now that Spicer and Scaramucci are both out.
I wonder if Spicer is having second thoughts with Scaramucci out of the shop. Just out loud musings here. I mean,
right.
David
He's being asked that question according to, I believe, Kevin Liptak, our White House reporter.
Right.
The upper press inside the White House, people are asking Spicer, are you going to stay now? No answer either way so far from Mr. Spicer.
Of course, Mooch became bigger than Trump, and haven't we seen this before? The fact that I'm using the word Mooch, using the name Mooch. Right. He was in the tabloids all weekend. He was the center of attention.
Worry with Bannon once upon a time,
exactly.
right?
But not in a good way. And he was getting, I was just texting with a source who said to me, look, he was getting too far out front and in a bad way, and that the president realized it. And I'm sure his family, by the way, realized it. I'm sure Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner did not like the language that Scaramucci was using. And to your point, there is only one star in this constellation, and that is Donald Trump.
Donald Trump. Although the president gave Scaramucci his blessing before he came on with Chris Cuomo for that 30-minute interview on New Day, end of last week. But hang on, just going back to Sean Spicer briefly, is there a possibility that he's going to say, hit the brakes, record scratch, like I may want to stay at the White House because this guy's gone?
That seems
I'll
tough.
text him right now and ask. I find that very hard to imagine.
He hasn't been answering the question.
He hasn't been replying to me either.
Reince Priebus is gone now. Obviously, Sean was there as a Reince Priebus ally, part of the old RNC, Republican National Committee crowd that worked on the general election and then into the White House. So it is hard to see if you believe that President Trump is trying to unshackle himself from any restraints from the establishment.
Appreciate it very much. Let's get some reaction. Mike Rogers, first to you. What do you think?